Hi, welcome to Shift, a podcast where we share stories of people overcoming their own internal BS and to really come out of their comfort zones and grow in their personal and professional lives. My aim here is to help people recognize that there's a lot of undiscovered part of ourselves that awaits us if we're just willing to get out of our comfort zones and get out of our own way. My name is Elena Agragimova. I'm your host. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Amal Ravindran. Amal is a co-founder and CEO of Selfstarter. Selfstarter is an online coding school teaching web development and transforming a new career paths for students without a college degree. And it's essentially matching engineers with great workplaces. But I also know it's much more than that. So Amal is going to tell us a little bit about that. Amal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Before we go into your entrepreneurship journey and kind of the impact that you're making on the workplaces in the Middle East, I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit more about Selfstarter, because I think it's a brilliant concept. It's definitely something that is future focused and relevant. So talk to us a little bit about how that looks so we can get the audience to understand what is it that you guys do.
Sure, Elena. So I think that the concept sort of, came into place when I started my career back in 2014, where I actually worked as a barista at Starbucks. And, growing up, it was incredibly hard for a person who was actually having a college degree and, putting that structure in place and actually getting into an entry-level job was hard enough, let alone think about people without one. So having that in place and having that in mind, of course, I wanted to work with low-income workers and try and influence their lives as much as possible. And we put this coding school together, and the idea being that we'll teach these low-income workers to actually find a job in technology and get them to become a software developer from there, and hopefully go from earning 1,000 dirhams, the hardest working people in the country, for example, living in modest places and sending money back home, to actually earning, let's just say 10, 12, 15, 20,000 dirhams and getting out of debt. So that's the broader goal from the organization's perspective.
I love it. I mean, there's this whole society, like social impact that you guys are after, which I think is brilliant. I'm curious, I mean, so this kind of concept is quite, not necessarily, it is new, particularly in the Middle East, right? And I'm curious what kind of challenges did you have launching something like this? Whether, what was the hardest part of that? Because it is, in the world where we're continuously kind of groomed to say, well, you need a 4-year degree, you need to follow the step by step, which you and I know is not necessarily the only way, but, for many people, and especially when you're talking about, getting people to buy into your idea, right? Or corporations that would then hire that talent. What were some challenges that you came across?
I think one of the good things about going about this was that a lot of hiring managers surprisingly were open-minded about it, right? So even when we talked to them about, hey, can we have people without a college education, they were open about it. They were happy to consider. But when it comes to challenges, I think predominantly those came in from the community that we're talking about, right? So for example, we're referring to people who's never actually had an office job. And for them to sort of transition from becoming, let's just say, a construction worker to go into an office space, that's a little bit of, mental blockage in their heads. And how to get past that, it's a little bit beyond them at that point, right? So only once they come forward and we talk to them, we sort of coach them, we tell them what's coming for them, they need to mentally prepare for that transformation. And it's at that point that we can actually help them become what we actually envisioned them to be. So I would say it's about that initial phase of how do we convince this person that this is actually real and we can actually make this happen for them, as opposed to them believing that there is no bright future at all. Mm-hmm. So it's more or less from the employee or the prospect themselves that we actually have a pushback.
Okay, that's great. That's interesting. Yeah. And so do you foresee what has been the change, I guess, so you've kind of probably been looking at this concept for quite some time. So what has been the change, especially in the last year? Have you seen like an acceleration of people being more open to this sort of idea, again, whether on corporate side or employee side? Have you seen that shift, or has it been quite steady across the last year or so?
I would say it's interesting because if we just look at last year, Elena, there's a lot of people who'd lost their jobs, right? So if you just think about that, there's been a shift from becoming an actual regular employee to becoming somebody who loses everything, right? So there's like some of the people that we actually speak to, for example, delivery drivers, right? They are actually people with college degrees. They've worked in a corporate environment. So we're talking about some of the folks who actually had a great job, but due to circumstances, of course, they had to sort of push it back. So there are those people. But I think from a macro perspective, there's definitely, let's just say, an element of hope for some of the people. And I think that predominantly happens from conversations, and which is contrary to what happened in 2020. But if we think about it, I suppose what actually came out of that is people getting together and talking about what can they do together, as opposed to them being by themselves, right? So if you just look at 2019, 2018, 2017, I think there's a culture that people are by themselves, and sort of, if you want to grow, you just have to do it by yourself. As opposed to past 2020, what we've seen is that people are coming together, trying to help each other, sort of at least talking about where they can help and where they can contribute. So I would say that culture, that tiny bit of a shift in the attitude would definitely help us a long way in the next 10, 20 years to come, right? So that's definitely beneficial.
Yeah, and I love just the name Self-Starter, and just coming from an educational background, there's definitely, self-education, kind of creation of your own career path is definitely something that is always a winner, right? So, and it's, and I always preach that 4-year degree is not for everybody, right? And a lot of companies are now also picking up on that, which is why we have the IBMs and the Googles that are kind of creating these academies internally, because there's a whole gap between what the universities and traditional education offers versus what the future of work will actually offer. So I'm curious to know, in your perspective, kind of being in this world, what do you see as the future of education moving forward, just from your side?
If you think about, again, from a macro perspective, from a college and what they're able to deliver or bring to the table is really that theoretical knowledge of how they can execute. But that's pretty much it, right? Because they are laser cut focused on the execution aspect of it, I suppose they forget about how to teach, how to be a better colleague, how to financially manage yourself when you're in a different environment. Especially when it comes to graduate students, it's probably the first time that they're stepping out of their comfort zones and being by themselves. So I would say the colleges of tomorrow is going to be a little bit more different, where they actually focus on some of the soft skills that these students need to acquire to get into the market. And I think beyond that, culturally, how they go about fitting into a group of people who they've never met before. How you work together with the marketing team? How do you work with the accounting team? How do you work with the engineering team, for example? It's a whole lot of internal alignments when it comes to working in a professional atmosphere, right? So, and it's very important that we focus on these kind of qualities as well. So I think there's going to be definitely a point where we actually try to think about the qualities that they need to bring into a workplace, and we sort of emphasize on that a whole lot more, as much as we sort of think about the execution skills. And it's a right balance of that which actually helps you get into a company, and it's not necessarily about your skills alone. So that's what I would say is going to be the next trend for the next couple of years.
Nice. And then on the other side, we also have the kind of the corporates, and I really love the recent article you wrote. Well, it wasn't recent, I guess it was last summer, but it was about allowing employees to have these side hustles, right? So if we look at the future of education, the future of work, and this is definitely something that's on the rise. Like the gig economy has already been there. The freelance economy has been there. It's just accelerated significantly. And between both of our startups, I think we also believe very much in like that mental well-being piece, right? That kind of the culture of the organization. How do you actually create employees and empower them to be creative and innovative? And I love that piece about have employees have those side hustles. There's nothing, if anything, it adds a lot to the company. So can you talk a little bit about that? And like, have you seen this as something, have you experienced this? Have you seen this as something successful in some companies that maybe you've interacted with?
For sure. I've come across colleagues from this company called MailChimp, and it's pretty admirable because they encourage these sort of activities a lot, right? Which means that they have an internal structure to exactly engage their employees and sort of, and they have that hypothesis where they believe that the business that they work with is not the only priority, right? And we sort of I would say, as colleagues of these people, like we have to believe that they obviously have their personal priorities, and we have to sort of understand that it's our responsibility to actually take a dive into understanding what they envision for themselves in 5 years. It's a cliche that a lot of people actually sort of push across the question that, hey, what do you see yourself in 5 years? And we never get that question asked anymore because it's way past that. But I suppose it's important to ask that question in the workplace so people understand what exactly is it that you see from this job, see from this workplace, see from these relationships, right? So it's much beyond that. And I think from a successful implementation perspective, MailChimp did a fantastic job. I think it goes a little bit beyond that because it's very important, again, just to understand how a human being operates in a workplace. And just to get that motivation out, it's going to take a whole lot more time than you think than just a regular question. You need to have that relationship in place. And I think it's much important to have that exercise where you actually consistently build an existing relationship, not just from a employee's perspective. Just ask them about how their life is going in general. How's the pandemic affecting them? What are their financial structure look like? It's surprising to know that 67% of the workforce in the UAE actually have a financial liability, right? And they're most of the time stressed about that. So things like that is something that the typical employer would actually oversee, but maybe we should actually deeper into. Which could actually potentially be affecting the employee's performance, but we just don't know about it. And unless you actually are able to drill down into the actual problem, I suppose we'll never find out what's really missing, right? So I would say those are some of the things that we can actually bring to the table, and we sort of understand what motivates them, and we can take it from there.
Absolutely. I think it just comes down to, like, as you mentioned, it's, if we're able to align individual personal goals with company business goals, you have a much larger chance of having a team full of people that are inspired and excited to come to work because they feel like the company cares about them beyond just them coming and executing. Right. And at the same time, another thing I love what you mentioned, I think it was in the same article, was help them grow, even if that means outside of your company, right? So, and that's what, like, we lose this human touch. And with Western, we work with corporates, right? And there's we always see like these news in the media, and this company is investing this much money in this and this much money in this well-being or wellness initiatives. And then when you get inside the company, you're like, but where's all this noise that you were making in the media about these topics? And then you get down to it and you realize it's just a lot of show. And I think part of it is because, yes, surely business is business, and it comes down to kind of increased revenue, decreased cost, etc. We get that, but and it's easier to kind of just focus on the business growth versus having those one-to-one conversations with your employees. But I think this is where the companies those that are going to really thrive in the future are going to distinguish themselves, because I think, especially with new generations coming in, like we have Generation Z, Generation Alpha, that are not necessarily interested in being executors of a task. They want to live and work with a purpose. And so leadership in general, if they don't start having these conversations and making time for these conversations, they're going to suffer in the long term. So yeah, I mean, you're spot on with that, absolutely. And I imagine that, and I know this is something you feel quite strongly about, is how does this, I've mentioned this a little bit now, but how does this further add to that workplace culture, essentially? So how is this aligned with building one up? Is there anything you want to add here on this point?
I think it essentially goes back to the same thing that you just pointed out, Alina. Like, you have to think about what's in it for the team member, the employee, the person that you're actually working with, right? So I suppose one of the biggest mistakes that we've all made probably in our lives is that delegating that process to an HR manager or a branding expert and say that, hey, we want to become the best employer in the region, that would be the worst mistake that we could ever make. Because unless you take ownership of these tasks and then sort of delegate that yourself and sort of practice that yourself, I suppose we'll never understand what actually everybody feels. And the problem with delegation is that once that person's having a conversation, you don't understand anything about your employees, right? So once you get to that position, I think it becomes very hard for you to get out of that. And I think from a workplace culture perspective, it just adds on to the things that we've been talking about, right? I think relationship is what matters more than delegating a task more than all hands meeting, more than a foosball table in your office, for example. I suppose a lot of people confuse the element of perks as opposed to culture. And what's beyond culture is how you actually treat people. Let's just call it very, very, let's break it down and make it very simple for people to understand. I think even culture is something that's come on within the last 10, 15 years. So if you just break it down, it's just about how I communicate to anybody else, how they communicate back to me, and everything else involved in that process, right? So I think if there's this one takeaway that we should probably focus on about work culture, is just listen. Instead of you doing the talking, right? So if you actually let the employee or the team member talk to you about what it is that they actually want to talk about, maybe we would have a better understanding about how we want to execute on these workplace culture. And it's not about deliverables. It is definitely about something else that they want to talk to you about.
Yeah, good point. Listen, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about you as an entrepreneur. So, and first of all, I think what you guys are doing with Selfstarter is it just has such a huge social impact, and it's just beyond just kind of upskilling and giving people the skills to thrive, in different careers. It has this whole disruptive notion to it of what the future of work will look like. And I'm just curious from Amal's perspective, what is sort of the things that you've learned about yourself throughout this journey? So you mentioned that you were kind of inspired by this and to kind of get this started, having to overcome your own challenges. But what have you learned about yourself in this journey?
I would say the reason why I do what I do every day is also because I love that relationship building exercises with people, right? So I think over the period of time, I would say I've launched or attempted to launch a few times from the year 2014, and I've failed miserably a couple of times, which sort of gets me to a position where I get to learn a whole lot more and understand exactly what's going on and where. So, and during that process, of course, you get to learn a little bit about, the people that you deal with, and of course, how to actually put together a business, a team, and an actual product, how to put together, MVP and launch. There's a whole lot of things which goes into that. So, but I suppose the biggest of the lessons, or the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway for me is really, again, trying understanding how we should operate as a group of people working together. And I think it's about purpose more than the product. Again, just to bring back the conversation about Gen Z and millennials, I suppose there's a whole lot of people who actually believe that it's not the deliverable which matters. It's about the why that you're doing that deliverable which actually matters, right? So, and I'm a millennial myself as well, Alina, so I can completely correlate to that. But I think with Gen Z in the market as well, it's a little bit more different, because I think they have a perspective about being entrepreneurs more than employees. And at least in their early careers, most of them have the mentality to be an entrepreneur, but end up being an employee, at least for the time being, right? So you have to understand that their priorities are a whole lot more different than what you actually envision them to be, right? So it doesn't matter how hard you try to impress them about your company culture and your vision, they internally have a structure in place that they want to accomplish something by themselves, and that you cannot call that entitlement. It's just a matter of being ambitious from their perspective, right? So fostering them is a little bit different from what we've all seen until now. So I would say those are the kind of things that sort of challenged me, and I got to learn from it, of course. So it's just different ways of engaging people, I would say, but definitely something good to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we have the generation Alpha coming in, so those are the ones born 2000 onwards, so that's a whole different generation as well, because they're just, if Gen Z grew up with technology, Generation Alpha is just on a different level. So I'm really curious of how that's going to change the world of work, because they're the ones that are in high school right now. So a couple of years from now, they're going to be graduating, and I'm really, really curious of how education is going to be impacted by their sort of drive and interests and passions and, motivations and stuff like that. I'm really, really curious. There's not enough research about it yet. So keep me posted if you come across anything. But I think it's like we just now got Gen Z. We just now stop being harsh on millennials and Gen Z and to say like, actually, no, they're not so bad. They're just ambitious and, and they're just continuously curious. I mean, this is the first time, I think, that we have access to as much information as we have today. So how can you possibly not be curious, right? When you have this thing in front of you, it's just access to information. So I think we need to stop picking on the millennials and the Gen Zs and just give them a chance.
True.
Absolutely.
One of the things, Elena, is I would assume that the element of risk within the people that we deal with is just going to keep increasing, right? As in, I would assume that millennials have been amazingly increasing risk takers than baby boomers or anybody within that arena, right? And I would just, I can see that Gen Z is obviously a little bit more open to risk than millennials, and I would assume that the generation after that is going to be a whole lot more, right? So it's the element of risk which is going to keep growing, which means that they probably won't be scared to actually change jobs every single day without thinking about resumes, right? So this could be one of the interesting in the next couple more years, but we'll find out, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I love the way the world of work is generally just moving anyway. It's just this whole idea of, that we need to be in this specific kind of, job because we did this degree, and although majority of or not majority, excuse me, but, it is majority. I guess more than 50% of university graduates don't actually end up in the degrees that they, like in the job that they studied for. And I think that, now that I'm speaking about this, now that I'm thinking about this out loud, it's, I really see it's going to be really, really big for the world of education because they're just, already based on what's happened last year, a lot of colleges and universities globally are going to go out of business. Simply, they just couldn't deliver and keep up, But in addition to that, I think the needs of future generations is going to transform. And if anything, I think platforms like Selfstarter and the likes are going to be those that are thriving because you're giving them a relevant kind of content, training, skills, mindset that is needed for them to be successful in the jobs today, not 4 years from now, right? It's just like it's now. So I think that's definitely spot on. And I'm curious, like if you had a magic wand, right? And what do you see? What is your impact that you're looking to make with Selfstarter if you had them in the next 12 months, let's say?
I would say it's about getting more people, opportunities, right? So, and not necessarily from a low-income background, by the way, Elena. So it's surprising to find out that more than 70% of the jobs that are actually available in a company is not even posted on the market, right? And on the flip side, about the people who are on social medias like LinkedIn asking about, hey, I just lost my job during COVID and can I actually get some help? So at the end of the day, it's about actually, helping people who are in need. And we almost never are able to identify who these people are because they are either not availably seen and they're just somewhere hidden in your, applicant tracking system or even worse, in your email box. So definitely enabling more opportunities in the region, if it's possible. That's the primary reason that we work with younger companies like startups. So it's about like $3.1 billion worth of jobs that are actually outsourced away from the MENA market, right? So we're trying to bring these jobs back to the region and trying to see if that's something that we can retain in the region and enable more opportunities for engineers and designers and sort of product people inside the country. So hopefully that those are the accomplishments that we'll make in the next 12 months.
Yes. Looking forward to seeing that, absolutely. And where can people find you? Where they can follow you? Where can they learn more about Selfstarter if they're interested, whether they're a startup or an individual?
They can go to the website selfstarter.ae, or you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, Amal Ravindran. Obviously you'll still see the name Selfstarter up there. So feel free, just drop in a note that you want to catch up on something, and I'm happy to talk.
Yeah, and I really look forward to more content from you as well, because I think you're very much spot on, and you're in a very interesting space because you get to talk to a population that is essentially needs the support, right? So if we're talking about low income kind of categories, but then also those maybe fresh graduates that are saying, okay, maybe I don't want to go the traditional route. So I think you have a lot of space to really be kind of on the ground with them and understanding their challenges. And I think that's that's the population that's really going to drive the future of work and future of education. So I really look forward to more articles from you, and I really enjoy reading a couple that you have out there. So definitely, I think that there's a lot of research that can be done around the work that you're doing. So it's going to be great to see that. I'm curious also if there's one sort of action point that you want our audience to take away, whether it is about entrepreneurship, whether it is about being a self-starter, or kind of, taking ownership of your own development and career. What would that be? What would you want the takeaway to be?
I would say just talk to people, talk to everybody, like talk to your friends, people who you haven't spoken to in years, like all those people who are in your contact list who you haven't spoken to in 5 years, please give them a call. You'll be surprised what comes out of these relationships, right? So I would just say that relationships matters quite a bit. And we're talking about workplace relationships in specific, right? So you just never know what comes out of these tiny little messages and phone calls and emails. So 100% just get in touch with people and talk. Very simple.
Love it. It's impactful. It's impactful. That's the more you have these conversations, the more you learn. The more you learn about yourself, the more questions come up, which is good, right? So and eventually you find the answers as well. So I love it. Amal, thank you so much. I really admire what you guys are doing. I know we've met through an accelerator, and I look forward to kind of being on this journey with you guys as well, and seeing how we can support each other. And really, the impact I think you're going to make is going to be fantastic. So best of luck to you, and thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Elena. I really appreciate it. You're very kind. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.